Hey, I'm Julien. So I was recently approached about producing a video of me reading some of my works. Given that I'm very passionate about writing, and of course the circumstances we do all currently face, I most happily agreed to do that. What I am presenting you today is a project that I've been working on for give or take a year now. I call it Hearth. Now what is Hearth? Hearth is a dark fantasy world placed with darkness, terrors, heroes that are not so heroic after all, with a very misleading name. Hearth. It reminds us of home, family, a cozy fire. It's a contrast to the sinister place that I'm about to take you. And a little reminder that no matter how bad things become, no matter how worn out we feel, it always gets worse. The reading sample that I am going to present to you today is one that I have chosen from one of the chapters of a novel that I'm working on. It's the seventh chapter actually, and I feel like it's just bringing this essence, this particular feeling across, the one that I'm actually proud about, the one that actually captures the essence of this world, of this creation that I am very passionate to be working in, that I want to expand. I hope you enjoy. 7. Whispers in the night. He could hear the footsteps in the distance. Subtle. The sound of leather against stone. Silent. Like the tread of a predator stalking its prey. And yet it was there. He wasn't gifted with a heightened sense of hearing, or any extraordinary talents for that matter. But with the stifling silence all around him, one could hear as much as a single drop of rain hitting the frozen stone. He wasn't scared, not anymore. To him, these footsteps almost seemed like salvation. They meant the end was not far for him. Remy of Havelsborg, from the Principality of Leustein. It meant a decent life where he hailed from, but a cowering existence at the whims of monarchs and nobles was never how he had imagined his life. Instead, Remy ventured beyond, into forest's dark thicket, and past the borders of Ronheim. He got to see the famed capital of the Northern Kingdom, and lay eyes upon the never-ending glacial plains of the frozen void. He got to barter with grim woodmen and shady dwarfs. Even the old road to Yaroth, leading toward the kingdoms in the west, can be found as detailed description in Remy's notes. So no, Remy wasn't disheartened in the face of his newfound perils. Even though it certainly meant death, he got to witness more of the world's wonders than any lad sweating shores behind the walls of Leustein. It had always fascinated people how Remy was able to remain positive in a world filled with horrors beyond imagining. And it would certainly fascinate them now how the man of Havelsborg managed to conjure up a brief smile while his veins were slowly freezing solid in his dark cell. The footsteps were growing louder now, the first foreign sound Remy heard since waking up in his sinister confinement. He couldn't remember how he got here. There was only the road to Yaroth, followed by the sudden pain forcing him toward the ground. His last memories of freedom were shedding little light, for abductions were an everyday normality in this world. But either way, he would know soon enough. There they were, the ominous footsteps. Louder still, closer. But there was something else accompanying them. Remy could hear it now. A rattled breathing. The sound of an injured throat. This is where the nightmare would begin. As Remy's ears were met by the rasping noise of air sucked in, he could suddenly feel a strange pressure applied to his insides. Like an invisible grasp tightened around his very heart. He had never felt anything like it. And just like this, Remy was scared. Almost like an impulse, not his own. He could feel sheer terror spreading through his mind. Where there was confidence and knowledge mere moments ago, was now nothing but doubt, uncertainty, panic. His cell was cold, but what he felt now was a different kind of chill, like ice from beyond the grave. Had he priorly dared to stand up and confront whatever awaited him, Remy was now crawling as far into his corner as he possibly could, almost trying to become one with the icy walls. It was of no use. He was but a lamb to the slaughter now. Staring toward the ground, Remy could suddenly feel a stinging pain, like two long needles piercing deep into his flesh. The footsteps had stopped. The horrendous breathing right before the bars of his cell. And with dread he realized the pain. It was a stare. With a shivering head, by both cold and terror, Remy raised his gaze. Slowly, prolonging the moment of blissful ignorance, of not knowing the face of whatever horror he was at the mercy of. Old leather, worn boots. Remy's eyes would wander upwards over striking blue cloth. Pants largely overlaid by a coat of rusty chainmail. There was a chest, covered entirely by the chainmail armor. Then his gaze fell upon these arms, long and frail, disproportionate, and lacking any color. A glazed skin like ice. Pitch-black veins visibly spreading underneath like a thicket of vines. And the hands, more like claws. There wasn't any visible back of the hand, nor any palms, just a pair of frail arms, reaching down to the stranger's knees, ending in long claws of glazed flesh. He couldn't take it anymore. Remy had to know. With the last shred of courage he managed clinging on to, Remy looked up. What he saw, for as briefly as he did before keeping his eyes fixated on the tiles to his feet, would remain etched into his memory for as long as he should be destined to live. There were no lips, no ears, no hair. There was but a long bald head, as pale as the rest of the skin. The lower half of the stranger's face was nothing but teeth, the lack of lips causing a permanent, nightmarish grin of razor-sharp fangs. The gap which was this mouth, it was gigantic. In contrast to this stood an absolutely minuscule pair of eyes, like two orbs the size of pebbles, glowing in a malicious icy hue. It was almost as if a blue fire was burning within the stranger's head, with what Remy perceived as eyes, being tiny, needle-pricked windows, allowing a peek inside. There was no visible nose in between mouth and eyes, simply a small lump of flesh, which could have passed as such, wasn't it for the lack of holes. Whatever the origin of such abomination, referring to it as stranger would hardly do it justice. To Remy this was a white, while it made Remy feel like lasting a lifetime. He was but given a dozen eye blinks worth of time to examine this white, before the overgrown mouth opened and breathed words with a voice like a graveyard breeze. "It is time," words softly whispered, yet ringing inside his skull. The cold, the terror, the pain. Remy swiftly found himself overwhelmed, as an icy grasp was slowly encroaching upon him. The man of Havelsborg was worlds away already. The last sound Remy would hear was the rattled breathing of an injured throat, right in front of him, before his world turned black. "Father!" He could hear his voice, see the faces of his loved ones. They were clear as day in one moment, and then torn, contorted, gone in the next. Ephemeral. It was like falling into a deep black pit, horrifying grimaces bearing a loose resemblance to his closest all around him. Then Remy's eyes shut open, cold sweat above his brows. The panic had faded to confusion. His eyes took a moment adjusting to the darkness around him, but swiftly he realized he had left his cell. This room where he found himself sitting now, it was different. Still unbearably cold, certainly, but the cobblestone which defined his cell was nowhere to be seen. Instead, this room seemed to be of cold, dark marble entirely. However, it wasn't just Remy's eyes that needed some time after awakening from this nightmare. In fact, all of his senses took a few moments to return. It was only after his discovery of the marbled floor that he heard the noise behind himself, a continuous one. The ominous rattled breathing of an injured throat. And once again, curiosity became panic. Forlorn feet on icy ground, a quest so far and never found, a rave which calls from shadows dark to hellhound's first and final bark. The words clearly hailed from behind Remy, and yet they were everywhere. They didn't as much echo across the room as they seemed to originate all around him in a cycle of endless fading and rebirth. The White's poem dug deep into Remy's mind, the words clinging to his memory so persistently that he suddenly started to consider them a part of himself. They were a truth, which he felt to have always known. It is time for the wanderer to fulfill his purpose. These words now cut through him like an ethereal blade. His purpose. Whatever was the meaning of all this? What ghastly ploy has he become victim? Has he become victim of this time? Remy's thoughts were clearer now. It seemed the poem robbed the man of his overwhelming panic. Yet this got him thinking. This white, this demon, this monstrosity, this thing seemingly needed him sane. But what for? It was at that point in Remy's train of thoughts that he noticed the ominous breathing behind him, or more precisely, the lack thereof. He didn't make much of it, however, for nothing in this scenario made any sense. And as if meant to be an underlining of such statement, a dense white mist started forming, right before Remy's eyes but a moment later. A mist creeping ever toward him, shifting and morphing in the air, contorting until its shape bore a striking resemblance to the nightmarish grimace of the weight which haunted him so. Even though Remy wouldn't be able to grasp the full reality of his situation in that instant, this should be the final moment of his world as it was. As soon as it began, uh, as soon as it took shape, the mist shifted anew, ever floating closer, like a soft pillow made of clouds. It began forming around Remy's mouth and nose. He couldn't breathe. Blood shed into his eyes, and the last thing he would feel before falling into a deep slumber was a foul breeze of air entering through his nostrils and creeping down his throat. That was really quite something. I love to write, but reading is so much work every time. You just want to do it perfect, reading the stuff that you wrote. I don't even want to get into how many takes it took for me to be moderately happy. Well, that was it. That was Hearth. Did Remy survive? Is he coming back? The story is far from over. Well, I don't have much more to say. So this is where I will wrap this video up. Just one more thing. Merci, Herr Jaminet, für die Möglichkeit, die mir haben. Kann nicht genug gesot gehen, das ist top. Cheers.